The silence of deep space wrapped around Epsilon Outpost like a cold blanket. Far from Earth, far from any major colony, the station hung in orbit around a gray, lifeless moon. Inside, the hum of life support and the soft beeping of consoles filled the command deck. Captain Luke Dawson stood near the main viewport, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the starfield. He wasn't a tall man, nor especially imposing, but there was a quiet steadiness about him that made his crew trust him without question. He wore a faded Navy uniform with a single stripe on the shoulder, simple like the man himself. At the sensor station, Lieutenant Mara Finch tapped at her screen, her brow furrowed. She was young, sharp-eyed, and quick to act. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her fingers moved with practiced ease over the controls. Something had just flickered on the long-range scanners. Something big. She double-checked the readings, then triple-checked. Her stomach tightened. "Captain," she said, voice low but urgent. "We've got a contact. Massive energy signature. Coming out of subspace." Luke turned slowly, his expression calm but alert. "How massive?" "Fleet level," Mara replied, swallowing hard. "And it's not ours." The command deck fell silent. Even the background hum seemed to quiet down. Everyone knew what that meant. In this part of space, there were no allies. Only threats. On the main screen, a distortion bloomed in the void. Space itself seemed to tear open, and from that rift emerged ship after ship. Hundreds at first, then thousands. They were sleek, black, and jagged, like shards of obsidian shaped into war machines. Their hulls shimmered with an eerie violet glow. The Cathar Dominion had arrived. Luke didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the deck and activated the comms. "All hands, battle stations. Seal bulkheads. Initiate protocol iron shield." Alarms sounded, but not the blaring kind. Just a steady, pulsing tone that signaled serious trouble without panic. Crew members moved quickly but calmly. They'd trained for this. They'd hoped it would never come, but they'd trained anyway. Mara pulled up the enemy fleet data. Estimate: 1 million troops aboard, maybe more. Their flagship is broadcasting a priority hail. "Put it through," Luke said. A moment later, a figure appeared on the main screen. Tall, armored in bone-like plating with glowing red eyes and a voice like grinding stone. This was Vorak the Unbroken, Supreme Commander of the Cathar Conquest Fleet. His species prided itself on strength, numbers, and total domination. They had crushed dozens of civilizations. To them, mercy was weakness. "Human outpost," Vorak boomed, his voice echoing through the speakers. "You are surrounded. Surrender your station and your lives. Resistance is pointless. I have 1 million troops. You have nothing." The bridge crew tensed. Some glanced at Luke, waiting for fear, for hesitation, but he just stared at the screen, his face unreadable. Then very calmly, he leaned toward the comm mic and said, "Good. I have 1 million targets." A beat of silence followed. Even Vorak seemed taken aback. His red eyes narrowed. "You mock me?" "No," Luke replied. "I'm just doing the math." He cut the transmission. The screen went dark. No dramatic music, no shouting. Just the quiet hum of the station and the distant glow of 1 million enemy ships. Mara exhaled sharply. That might have been the boldest thing anyone's ever said to a Cathar warlord. "Maybe," Luke said, turning back to the viewport. "Or maybe it's just the truth." He walked to the tactical station where Ben Carter was already rerouting power to the defense grid. Ben was the station's chief engineer, broad-shouldered with grease-stained hands and a dry sense of humor. He'd spent the last 6 months turning scrap and spare parts into something that just might give them a fighting chance. "You ready?" Luke asked. Ben nodded without looking up. The moon's crust is laced with drone ports, micromines, and sensor ghosts. They think they're attacking a station. They don't know the whole moon's a weapon. "Good," Luke said. "Let them think we're helpless." Outside, the Cathar fleet began to move. Ships peeled off in formation, surrounding Epsilon Outpost like wolves circling wounded prey. Energy readings spiked, weapons charging, shields flaring. The first barrage would come soon. Mara monitored their movements. "They're scanning us, trying to find weak points." "Let them scan," Luke said. "Tell the civilians to stay in the lower decks. Seal off sectors B through G and activate the decoy signals." "Aye, sir," she replied, fingers flying across the console. Down in the habitation levels, families huddled together. There were only about 200 people on the station. Scientists, engineers, a few children born in orbit. None of them were soldiers, but all of them had trained for this day. They knew the drills. They knew what to do if the hull breached. They also knew the odds, but they trusted Luke, not because he promised victory, but because he never lied to them. Back on the bridge, the first enemy shot lit up the void, a searing beam of plasma that struck the station's forward shield. The lights flickered but held. The shield generator groaned under the strain, but it held. "They're testing us," Ben muttered. "Then let's give them a real test," Luke said. He gave the order. Hidden panels on the moon's surface slid open, releasing clouds of sensor-dampening dust. At the same time, dozens of fake transponders activated, mimicking the signatures of human warships that didn't exist. On Cathar scanners, it suddenly looked like Epsilon Outpost was the tip of a much larger human fleet. Vorak's voice crackled over an open channel, furious. "Tricks. You rely on tricks like cowardly vermin." Luke didn't answer. He didn't need to. The Cathar ships began firing wildly, wasting energy on ghosts. Their formation wavered as commanders argued over what was real. Mara allowed herself a small smile. "They're confused." "Good," Luke said again. "Confused enemies make mistakes." He knew this wouldn't last. The Cathar had numbers, firepower, and rage. Sooner or later they'd see through the ruse. But every second bought time. Every mistake they made gave Earth another hour to prepare, another chance to survive. He looked out at the swarm of enemy ships, their violet lights staining the blackness of space. 1,000,000 troops, 1,000,000 lives ready to die for conquest, and he had 1,000,000 targets. The station shuddered again as another blast hit the shields. This time, a warning light flashed red, shield integrity at 78%. It would drop fast. Luke took a deep breath. All stations hold position. Maintain deception. And remember, this isn't about winning today. It's about making sure they never forget what happens when they pick a fight with humans. No one cheered. No one shouted. They just nodded and went back to work. Because out here on the edge of nothing, courage wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was steady. It was doing your job while the universe tried to erase you. And as the Cathar fleet closed in for the kill, Epsilon Outpost stood its ground, not with bluster, but with grit, with cunning, and with the simple, terrifying truth that sometimes the smallest spark can ignite the darkest night. The Cathar fleet pressed closer, their ships forming a tightening ring around Epsilon Outpost. Plasma bolts streaked through the void, slamming into the station's shields with growing force. Each impact sent tremors through the metal corridors, rattling tools in their racks and shaking dust from ceiling vents. But inside the command deck, the humans moved with quiet purpose, not panic. Luke Dawson stood near the main console, watching the enemy movements on the tactical display. Their attack was predictable, brutal, direct, and overwhelming. Just as the Cathar always fought. They believed numbers solved everything. They did not understand that humans had spent centuries learning how to fight smarter, not harder. "Shields at 62%, Mara Finch reported, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "They're focusing fire on the forward arc." "Good," Luke said. "Let them think that's our weak spot." He turned to Ben Carter, who was hunched over a secondary panel, fingers dancing across the keys. Wires snaked from his workstation into the floor, patched into systems that weren't supposed to talk to each other. Over the past months, Ben had turned the entire moon into a hidden weapon. Mining drones became scouts. Waste recyclers were rewired into signal jammers. Even old cargo haulers were loaded with explosives and set to drift like space mines. "The moon's crust is ready," Ben said without looking up. "All drone ports armed, micromines primed, sensor ghosts cycling every 30 seconds. Activate swarm pattern Delta," Luke ordered. Mara tapped in the command. Instantly, hundreds of tiny drones shot from hidden vents on the moon's surface. They weren't weapons, not yet. They were decoys, each one broadcasting a fake ship signature. On Cathar scanners, it suddenly looked like a human fleet was emerging from the moon itself. Confusion rippled through the enemy formation. Ships slowed. Some fired at empty space. Others broke rank to investigate. Vorak's voice boomed over an open channel, furious. "You hide behind illusions, human. Face us with honor." Luke didn't answer. Honor meant nothing when survival was on the line. He watched as 3 Cathar destroyers veered off course, chasing phantom signals into a debris field. One of them triggered a micromine, silent, invisible, and deadly. The explosion wasn't large, but it tore through the ship's engine array. It spun out of control, colliding with another vessel. 2 down, 999,998 T. I'll go inside the station. The crew worked in silence. No one shouted. No one wasted breath. They knew every second counted. In the engineering bay, technicians rerouted coolant to keep the shield generator from overheating. In the comms room, a young operator named Eli sent false distress calls on looping frequencies, making it seem like other human outposts were under attack nearby. The Cathar couldn't tell what was real. Mara glanced at Luke. They're starting to split their forces. Some are scanning the moon now. Let them, he said. The more they look, the more traps they'll find. Ben finally looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. You know they'll figure it out eventually. I know, Luke replied. But by then, they'll have lost too much to retreat. He remembered the briefing from Earth Command months ago. The Cathar didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They erased civilizations. So if Epsilon Outpost fell, it wouldn't just be a loss, it would be an invitation. An open door for the Dominion to march toward Earth. That couldn't happen. Outside, the battle grew stranger. Human tactics made no sense to the Cathar. Ships appeared and vanished. Signals jumped from one location to another. A Cathar cruiser fired on what it thought was a human frigate, only to realize too late it had destroyed one of its own support vessels. Anger turned to frustration. Frustration turned to doubt. On the bridge of his flagship, Vorak slammed a fist onto his command throne. Find the human commander. I will tear him apart with my own hands. But Luke wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Mara pointed to a new alert on her screen. They're launching boarding pods. Targeting our docking ring. Luke nodded. Then it's time for Phase 2. He gave the signal. Deep beneath the moon's surface, dormant systems whirred to life. Old mining tunnels, long sealed, opened silently. Inside them, hundreds of modified maintenance bots, now armed with plasma cutters and EMP charges, woke from standby. They weren't soldiers, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to cause chaos. As the Cathar boarding pods approached the station, they passed through a cloud of drifting debris. Hidden among the rocks were sensor-triggered mines. One pod detonated mid-flight. Another veered off course and slammed into the station's outer hull, but not where the humans were. It hit a decommissioned storage bay, empty and sealed. The Cathar warriors inside cut through the hull, expecting resistance. Instead, they found darkness, silence, and a maze of dead-end corridors. Then the lights went out completely. Emergency doors slammed shut behind them, trapped. Back on the bridge, Mara watched their life signs flicker on the map. They're stuck in Sector 9, no way out. Good, Luke said. Let them think we're weak enough to board. Then show them what waiting in the dark really means. Ben activated the maintenance bots. They rolled silently through service tunnels, converging on the trapped invaders. The Cathar, used to open battle, had no answer for machines that didn't bleed, didn't tire, and didn't fear death. One by one, the boarding team's signals vanished. Vorak roared in fury over the comms. You fight like insects. Hiding, biting, vanishing. Luke finally spoke. Insects survive extinction. Empires don't. He cut the channel again. The station shook as another plasma blast struck the shields. Now at 41%. It wouldn't hold much longer. But the humans weren't relying on shields anymore. They were turning the battlefield itself against the enemy. Mara leaned closer. Earth Command just sent a message. Reinforcements are still 3 weeks out. Luke didn't react. He'd expected that. Then we buy 3 weeks. How? By making every Cathar ship they lose feel like a wound to their pride, he said. They came here thinking we'd beg. Instead, we're making them bleed for every inch. Ben chuckled darkly. They wanted 1 million targets. Guess they got what they asked for. Outside, the fake fleet signals shifted again. This time they mimicked a carrier group jumping into the system. The Cathar fleet hesitated. Was it real? Was it another trick? In that moment of doubt, 2 more ships drifted too close to the moon and triggered a chain of buried charges. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the enemy line. Luke watched it all with quiet focus. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't trying to be. He was just a man doing his job, protecting people he'd never meet on a world he might never see again. But that was enough. The Cathar had brought 1 million troops. They thought that made them unstoppable. They hadn't counted on humans who saw 1 million troops and only saw 1 million chances to strike back. Vorak had had enough. His patience, never deep, had burned away like fuel in a dying engine. The humans were not breaking. They were not fleeing. They were not even fighting like proper warriors. Every time he swung his fist, it hit empty air. Every order he gave was met with silence or sabotage. His fleet had lost nearly 80 ships, not to direct combat, but to traps, tricks, and the cold, silent cunning of a species he had dismissed as soft. Now, standing on the obsidian bridge of his flagship, Vorak made a decision. No more games, no more waiting. He would burn the moon and the station from orbit. Let the humans choke on ash and vacuum. Let their bones drift in the void as a warning to others. Order all capital ships, he growled, his voice shaking with rage. Full bombardment sequence. Target the moon's surface and the station. Reduce both to dust. The Cathar fleet shifted. Massive cannons powered up along the hulls of their dreadnoughts. Energy built in glowing cores ready to unleash hellfire. Inside Epsilon outpost, alarms blared. Not the calm pulse of before, but a sharp, rising wail. Mara's eyes widened as she read the data. They're charging main batteries. Full planetary strike. They're going to glass the moon. Luke didn't flinch. He'd expected this. Then it's time for Project Echo. Ben's face went pale. You're sure? Once it's live, we can't shut it down. I know, Luke said. But if we don't do it now, there won't be a later. Project Echo was their last card. Hidden in the moon's deepest tunnels were thousands of autonomous hunter-killer drones. Small, fast, and smart. Each one carried a micro-warhead and was linked to a swarm AI that learned from every encounter. They weren't meant to win a war. They were meant to make the enemy regret starting one, but the system had a flaw. The main relay was damaged during an earlier quake. It needed a manual override from inside the relay chamber deep in the moon's unstable core. Ben looked at Luke. I'll go. No, Luke said. You're needed here. I built the system, Ben replied, already pulling on a reinforced suit. I know the codes. I know the paths. And if I don't go, Echo stays dead. Luke studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Get it done, fast. Ben grabbed a toolkit and ran for the lunar tram. The station shuddered as the first Cathar barrage lit up the sky. Bolts of violet energy slammed into the moon's surface, melting rock into glass. Cracks spread across the gray plains. Dust clouds rose like ghosts. Mara tracked Ben's progress on a small screen. He's halfway to the relay. Keep the decoys running, Luke ordered. Make them think we're evacuating. More fake signals burst from the station. Life pods, shuttles, even a fake distress beacon from a non-existent colony ship. The Cathar, desperate for a real target, split their fire again. Some ships broke off to chase shadows. But Vorak wasn't fooled this time. Ignore the noise, he bellowed. Focus fire on the station core. Another blast struck Epsilon outpost. This time the shields flickered and died. Lights went out across half the station. Emergency backups kicked in, casting everything in red. We're exposed, Mara said, her voice tight. Then we fight in the dark, Luke replied. Down in the moon, Ben reached the relay chamber. The tunnel walls groaned under the bombardment. Rocks fell from the ceiling. He ignored them, climbing over debris to reach the control panel. His hands moved fast, entering codes, bypassing safeties, rerouting power from the station's dying grid. Outside, the Cathar fired again. A direct hit near the relay zone. The ground shook violently. A support beam collapsed, pinning Ben's leg. He cried out in pain but kept working. Blood soaked his suit, but his fingers never stopped. On the station, Mara saw his vitals spike. Ben's hurt. He's not moving fast enough. Luke stared at the screen, jaw clenched. He wanted to say something, thank him, tell him to hold on. But there were no words left. Only actions. Then, a green light flashed on Mara's console. Relay's live, she whispered. Echo is online. From deep within the moon, hatches burst open. Thousands of drones poured into the sky like a swarm of angry wasps. They moved in perfect sync, dodging fire, weaving through debris, targeting Cathar engines, sensors, and weapon ports. They didn't attack all at once. They picked their moments. One drone would blind a ship's targeting system. Another would slip inside a cooling vent and detonate. A third would mimic a distress signal, luring rescue craft into ambushes. The Cathar fleet, so proud and orderly, began to unravel. Ships collided, trying to evade the swarm. Command channels filled with panicked shouts. For the first time, fear spread through their ranks. Vorak watched in disbelief as his mighty armada bled in silence. How? How can such small things break us? Back on the station, Luke finally allowed himself a breath. But it was short-lived. Mara's voice was quiet. Ben's signal just went dark. Luke closed his eyes for a second. Then he opened them again, hard and clear. He bought us time. We honor him by using it. She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. Reinforcements are still 2 weeks out. We won't last 2 weeks, Luke said. But we might last long enough to make them turn back. He looked at the tactical map. The Cathar were regrouping, but slowly. Their confidence was cracked. Now was the moment to push. Send all remaining drones toward their flagship, he ordered. Not to destroy it. To make Vorak feel hunted. Mara input the command. The swarm shifted, converging on the massive command vessel. They didn't attack its armor. They targeted its comms, its viewports, its pride. One drone even slapped a small explosive onto the bridge observation blister. Harmless, but terrifying. Vorak flinched as the blast rattled his throne. He saw the tiny machine cling to the glass like a spider, then vanish into the dark. For the first time, he felt small. On the station, the crew worked in exhausted silence. Oxygen levels were dropping. Power was failing. But no one gave up. They patched wires with tape, rerouted data through broken conduits, and kept the drones flying with sheer will. Luke walked the deck, checking on his people. He placed a hand on a young technician's shoulder. He shared a nod with a medic tending to minor burns. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. They all knew what was coming, and they all knew why they stayed. Outside, the battle raged on, but the tide had turned. Not because the humans were stronger, but because they refused to play by the enemy's rules. They turned weakness into weapon, silence into strategy, and sacrifice into strength. Ben was gone, but his work lived on in every drone that struck, every Cathar ship that faltered, every second of doubt that crept into Vorak's mind. Luke looked out the cracked viewport at the burning sky. The station groaned around him, but he stood straight. They weren't winning. But they were making the cost too high to bear, and sometimes that was enough. Vorak could no longer stand it. His fleet was bleeding. His pride was shattered, and the humans, those small, soft, clever humans, were still standing. They had no great weapons, no endless ships, no mighty empire behind them. Just stubbornness, just silence, just pain turned into purpose. He would end this himself. From his flagship, he gave a single order. Prepare my boarding craft. I will take the human commander's head with my own hands, his officers protested. It was dishonorable, they said, unnecessary. But Vorak silenced them with a glare. Honor had failed. Numbers had failed. Now only raw will remained. A sleek, armored shuttle detached from the flagship, cutting through the debris field toward Epsilon Outpost. Behind it came a dozen assault pods packed with his elite guard. They would not be fooled by decoys this time. They would tear the station apart until they found Luke Dawson. Inside the station, Mara saw the new threat on her screen. Vorak's coming himself. He's leading the boarding party. Luke didn't look surprised. Of course he is. He thinks this is personal now. It is personal, Mara said. Then let's give him a personal welcome. He turned to the crew. Initiate final protocol. Scuttle charges armed. Core overload in 30 minutes. A hush fell over the bridge. They all knew what that meant. The station would destroy itself and take the moon with it. There would be no escape for anyone left aboard. Mara stepped closer. You're staying, aren't you? Luke nodded. Someone has to make sure the overload completes, and someone has to keep Vorak busy long enough for you to get clear. I'm not leaving you, she said. You have to. He replied gently. You're the only one who knows the full drone network codes. If Earth gets this data, they can build 1,000 Epsilon outposts. That's how we win. Not with one station, with 1,000 more. She wanted to argue, but she saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't about bravery. It was about duty. Down in the lower decks, the last civilians boarded the final escape pods. Engineers sealed off damaged sections. Lights flickered as power was rerouted to the core. The station groaned like a dying beast, but it held together just long enough. Mara prepared her pod. She loaded the drone AI core mission logs and Luke's final message to Earth Command. Then she hugged him quickly, fiercely. Don't die for nothing, she whispered. I won't, he said. I'll die for everything, she left. The pod launched silently into the dark, vanishing among the wreckage. Alone now, Luke walked through the empty corridors. He passed the mess hall, the gym, the tiny garden where someone had once grown tomatoes in 0G. All quiet, all waiting. He reached the command center and sealed the blast doors. Then he sent a single signal, a beacon bright and clear broadcasting his exact location. A challenge. Come and get me. Minutes later, the hull shuddered. Metal screamed as plasma cutters breached the outer shell. Boots pounded on the deck. Cathar warriors poured in, their armor scorched, their eyes burning with fury. They found the station nearly empty. No resistance, no traps. Just one man standing in the center of the command deck, arms at his sides. Vorak stepped forward, removing his helmet. His face was scarred, his eyes red with rage and exhaustion. "You are the last." "I am," Luke said. "Then kneel." "Let your death be quick," Luke shook his head. "I don't kneel, and my death won't be quick. It'll be loud." He tapped a button on his wrist console. Deep below, the moon's core began to pulse. Hidden charges, planted weeks ago by Ben and his team, activated in sequence. The overload wasn't just in the station. It was in the moon itself. The entire celestial body had been turned into a bomb. Alarms blared. Red lights spun. The floor trembled, Vorak snarled. "You would destroy yourself just to kill me?" "No," Luke said, stepping closer. "I'm destroying you to save everyone else." The Cathar commander lunged, claws outstretched. Luke didn't dodge. He met the charge with a punch to the gut, then drove his knee into Vorak's jaw. It wasn't a fair fight. Luke was smaller, weaker, human. But he fought like a man with nothing left to lose. They crashed into consoles, sparks flying. Vorak roared, throwing Luke across the room. But Luke got up. Again and again he got up. Outside, the first charges detonated. The moon cracked open, spewing molten rock and superheated gas. Cathar ships caught in the blast wave were shredded by debris. The flagship listed hard to starboard, its engines failing. Inside, the command deck tilted. Consoles exploded. Smoke filled the air. Vorak grabbed Luke by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "You lose. Your station dies. Your people die. Your world will burn next." Luke gasped for air but smiled. "You still don't get it. We don't fight to win. We fight so you never stop paying for trying." With the last of his strength, he triggered the final command. The core went critical. Light filled the room. Not fire, but pure, blinding energy. The overload wasn't an explosion. It was a chain reaction, designed to collapse the moon's structure inward before bursting outward in a controlled pulse. It would take out everything within 1,000 kilometers. Vorak dropped Luke, staring in horror at the view screen. His fleet was already breaking apart. His flagship was breaking apart. And the human, this small, quiet human, was still standing. "You counted soldiers," Luke said, blood on his lips. "We counted opportunities." The light swallowed them both. Far away, Mara's pod rocked as the shockwave passed. She watched the sensors go dark. Epsilon outpost, the moon, the Cathar flagship. All gone. She didn't cry, not yet. She activated the long-range transmitter and sent the data packet toward Earth. Then she whispered the words that would echo across the stars. "I have 1,000,000 targets." Back at the blast site, silence returned, but it wasn't empty. Floating in the wreckage, a single escape pod, small, scorched, and sealed, drifted slowly away from the ruins. Its hull was blackened, its systems barely alive, but inside a faint heartbeat pulsed on the medical monitor. It wasn't Luke, not exactly, but it was someone. And as long as one human breathed, the fight wasn't over. The Cathar had learned a hard lesson that day. Numbers didn't win wars. Will did, and humans had more of it than anyone in the galaxy ever imagined. Weeks passed. The void where Epsilon Outpost once hung was now a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen dust. Silence ruled again, but it was a different kind of silence, not empty, but heavy with memory. Far from the wreckage, near the edge of the Sol system, the UNS Resolute drifted in quiet orbit around Mars. Its hull bore the scars of recent battles, but its lights burned steady. On the bridge, Captain Mara Finch stood at the main viewport, her uniform crisp, her eyes older than they had been just a month before. She had been promoted after the loss of Epsilon Outpost, not for glory, but for survival. She carried the weight of everyone who hadn't made it back, especially Luke. Behind her, technicians worked at consoles, scanning deep space frequencies. One of them called out, "Captain, we've got a signal." "Weak but confirmed." "It's from the Epsilon debris field." Mara turned quickly. Source? Lone pod. No transponder. But the hull signature matches pre-evacuation models. Her heart beat faster. Life signs? Faint, one occupant. Vital signs stable but low. She didn't hesitate. Prep a recovery team. I'm going myself. Hours later, a shuttle returned to the Resolute carrying a black Enid escape pod no bigger than a closet. Medics rushed it to the infirmary. Inside, wrapped in thermal foil and hooked to monitors, was a man. Not Luke Dawson, but Eli, the young comms operator who'd sent the fake distress calls during the siege. He'd been in a maintenance bay when the overload hit, sealed inside a backup pod meant for emergencies. The blast had thrown him clear, and the pod's auto-hibernation kept him alive. Mara stood by his bedside as he stirred awake. His voice was hoarse. Did we stop them? Yes, she said softly. You all did. News of the Cathar retreat spread fast. Their fleet had limped back to Dominion space, half its size, its myth of invincibility shattered. Survivors told stories of humans who fought like ghosts, who turned moons into weapons, who smiled as they died. The Cathar High Council fell into bitter debate. Some called for total war. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, humanity was not prey, but a predator in disguise. On Earth, schools began teaching the story of Epsilon Outpost, not as a tragedy, but as a warning to any who thought humans would bow. Children recited Luke's last words like a creed, I have 1,000,000 targets. The phrase appeared on recruitment posters, ship hulls, even street murals. It wasn't about violence. It was about resolve. Mara visited Earth briefly. She stood at the memorial wall in Geneva, where Luke's name was etched beside Ben's and the others. No body to bury, just a name, a date, and a legacy. She didn't speak at the ceremony. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Back aboard the Resolute, she reviewed the final data packet from Epsilon. Every drone log, every trap schematic, every second of the battle. Earth Command had already begun building new outposts using the same principles, small, smart, and deadly when cornered. The Cathar had shown the galaxy what humans could do with nothing. Now humanity would show them what they could do with time. One evening, alone on the observation deck, Mara received a private message from Earth's Defense Council. It was short. Your next assignment, lead the Echo Initiative. Build what Luke started. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Far out in the asteroid belt, unnoticed by most, a salvage drone picked up a faint energy trace. It led to a drifting object, partially melted, covered in ice but intact. Inside, a single light blinked slowly on a control panel. The pod's ID plate was scorched but readable, Epsilon 7. No one knew who was inside. Not yet. But the pod was transmitting a simple pulse, a human-made signal repeating every 10 seconds. Alive. Waiting. Mara would hear about it soon. And when she did, she wouldn't rush. She'd let the pod drift a little longer, because sometimes hope needed time to breathe. The galaxy had learned its lesson. The Cathar would not return soon. But if they did, they would find more than stations and ships. They would find a species that turned loss into strength, silence into strategy, and one man's last words into a promise. Humans didn't need 1,000,000 troops. They just needed one chance, and they'd make it count. Mara looked out at the stars, not with fear, but with quiet certainty. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But as long as someone remembered Epsilon Outpost, humanity would never be easy prey. And somewhere in the dark, a pod drifted on, carrying a heartbeat, a secret, and the stubborn spark that refused to go out.